If you've had a baby after the age of 35, whether it's your first, second, third, fourth, or however many, you're not going to want to miss this episode where we dive into feminine depletion and what you need to know around postpartum and perimenopause, how postpartum impacts perimenopause symptoms, and what is normal and what isn't, and what you can do about it. What's up, sister? Welcome back to the Period Whisperer podcast, the show helping perimenopause and menopause women de-stress your body and decode what it's saying to you so you can own your own health, energy, and weight loss again. If you're new, I'm so happy you're here. I'm Bria. I'm your host, a recovering people pleaser and hustle addict turned functional and holistic hormone specialist. Let's lean in and learn what your body is saying to you. Hey there, sister. Did you know that about 20% of women are having their first child after the age of 35? And there's been an increase in babies being born to mothers after the age of 35 by 67% in the last 3 decades. This means that so many more women are experiencing postpartum hormonal shifts at the same time as the hormonal shifts of perimenopause. So I thought we should definitely be talking about it, about how perimenopause impacts this time, about a topic that is equally as taboo to perimenopause and what we need to know. So I had to have my friend and postpartum educator, Jen Morris, come on to shed some light and truths on this part of our lives as women. Jen is a certified integrative health coach, the founder of Renegade Motherhood, who helps moms discover and rediscover the woman within the mother and reclaim their energy, vitality, and purpose. Through her podcast, social media platform, and online community, she is breaking down pervasive myths about postpartum recovery and maternal well-being and helping moms prioritize themselves amidst the journey of raising kids. Jen has been featured on Well and Good and Pure Wow, along with several podcasts. In addition to her postpartum and nutrition career, she is also a seasoned stage and commercial actor, having appeared on hundreds of stages and in multiple commercials. So I know you will love her energy in this interview as much as I did. Let's dive in. Well, hey there, sister. Welcome back to the Period Whisperer podcast. And it is a really important episode today that I am so grateful that you're here to tune into. And to help us talk about it, you already heard the bio, you already heard my intro of her, but I'm so excited to have Jen Morris here to shed some light on a really big topic for us. So welcome, Jen, to the Period Whisperer podcast.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, me too. It's always so great. Jen and I met previously through an event, and it's always so amazing to connect with other women who are, advocating for women's health, shedding light on different areas. And this is a big one. So I'm grateful for you to be here today.
Yeah, I know we were just talking before we hit record about how it's wild to me that periods and menopause and perimenopause and postpartum is still kind of like a taboo topic, or just a not talked enough about topic when it's been happening since the beginning of time, or the beginning of civilization, I should say, the beginning of humankind. So
yeah. And I mean, critical for life.
For it. Yes. Yeah, exactly. Like a key infrastructure of human existence. Right.
Mm-hmm. And it is still, and it continues to perpetuate. Like I talk about periods and period blood and, all the things that go along with that all day long. But like, even for me to broach that topic, even with my daughter, is hard for her. And it's like, if that's still happening, we've got our work cut out for us.
Yeah, that's interesting because I have a 3-year-old and a almost 7-year-old, both girls. And I have found myself being like very open. I'm a bit of an open book to begin with. And as you know, when you have kids, like, closed doors go out the window. Like you rarely go to the bathroom by yourself. And so, but I do remember kind of when they were old enough to start asking, and they would I'd be on my period and they'd wander into the bathroom and want to hang out and have a conversation, they'd be like, oh my God, blood. And I'm like, well, I can kind of, shove it off, or I can tell them what's going on, And so they're very aware, maybe too aware. I don't know. I'm just figuring it out as I go.
No, I will say no.
But I feel like it was kind of still and I was not raised in a prudish household at all, but I was raised in the 80s, and I got my period in the early 90s. So it was still, there wasn't nearly a lot of conversation. And also there was no social media and all those things I miss actually, but But anyway, I think your show is amazing, and what you're talking about is so important for, not only like up and coming generations, but also like those of us who grew up in a time where we didn't, have all this stuff that we were talking about. So
yeah. Well, thank you for that. And I'm so appreciative of the work that you do. So why don't we start with you and how you even came to be a postpartum educator?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a journey, I think, like for any entrepreneur. I really got my start in nutrition like 15 years ago. I was actually living in New York City at the time. I had moved there as an actor, and very quickly took my health from semi-crappy to total shit. Are we allowed to swear on this show?
Yeah, you're good.
I should have asked. Okay. And I just was totally burned out. And so I started, luckily, one of my many, many part-time jobs that I had there was working for a health fair company, which I found kind of ironic because I was like not the picture of health by any means. And so I started meeting a lot of people in this kind of wellness world, and fell into it and discovered I really liked it. Ended up going back to get a health coaching certification, and always sort of found I had a couple male clients, but always found I was definitely working more with women. And then, flash forward 10 years, found myself, pregnant with my first child, and, started doing like a lot of the reading around, prenatal. I feel fortunate that our fertility journey was very easy. So I don't take that lightly either, because I know that is not the case enough. So I didn't really feel like I had to do a lot of like the kind of fertility research. But then when I was pregnant, of course, then you start, going down those rabbit holes of like what to eat, what not to eat, and all that stuff. And so I kind of thought, well, I didn't give postpartum a thought, to be completely honest. And that is what I found to be such a huge issue, at least in the States where I'm based. And so I can really only speak to that specifically. But, there was all these classes around prenatal care, around the actual childbirth itself, around taking care of the baby, diapering, infant CPR, and then breastfeeding, because we knew we wanted to try it. There was really nothing else beyond like have some ice packs ready and, have some meals in the freezer. And again, I also like recognize, like I'm a white woman. I come from a place of privilege, and I lived in Denver at the time, which is, we do have a lot of birthing options where I live and stuff like that. So like compared to friends who are still in New York City, it was like Oz. We had so many options, and there was still like just not a lot. And I didn't realize it at the time because I wasn't looking for it. So maybe there was more and I just wasn't looking for it, but I felt like I was taking a lot of classes. I was even teaching some prenatal classes like during this time using my, education, nutrition education. So anyway, I have the baby, and, then kind of just pretty quickly started realizing like I had my temper like was very short. I had a really short fuse. My hearing had changed. So I remember like my husband like would open a bag of chips or something, crunchy crackers or something, and the kitchen, which we had a pretty small house. So like it was kitchen, living room, or like one space, and he would be like chewing them. And I was like, I am going to like murder you. I didn't. If anyone's listening in law enforcement, didn't do it. I'm still alive and well and currently working in our office. But, just like things were just like really driving me up the wall. And I kind of kept thinking, well, it'll pass as time goes on. And it didn't. And found myself, having what I called the stroller incident a couple months later in the parking lot of an Old Navy, where I couldn't figure out how to open a stroller, and had a pretty much like a panic attack in the driveway, in the parking lot. Well, my daughter was like blissfully sleeping in her bucket, and just like started to kind of realize like I wasn't doing as well as I was like outwardly saying I was. And I think that's another part of the problem, is that there's still a lot of stigma around moms and parents in general and caregivers in general, asking for help and saying we're not doing okay. So that was kind of like the beginning of me just starting to kind of do my own research and sort of look for some answers and discovering some things. But then it really took like a second pregnancy right in the midst of COVID, pre-vaccines, pre-everything. She was born September 2020. That then it was like really like okay, I've got to like, coming out of that, and in the last 2 years, really, realizing like, okay, it's really time now to start to do some of this work on myself. And then from there, how can I help other women? Because there's so many who are really struggling.
Yeah, for sure. And, it's funny, like if you'd asked me, because postpartum is such a taboo topic, if you'd asked me about symptoms of it, I don't think I would have thought of, that frustration or that lack of bandwidth or, even that experience that you had, I guess, not being able to put together the stroller, whatever you might boil that down to. So it is so important to talk about and hear what those things are, what it looks like, what it might not look like, and what it could look like, all those, so we recognize it.
Yeah. And it's, it's different. It's different for everybody too.
Yeah.
And I think some of it, and I think I had a lot of shame around it for a long time too, because in so many ways, the first time at least, because it was not a COVID world at this point, but I had a lot of people coming over and bringing food, and I was self-employed. So I gave myself a paid maternity leave,
right.
because, no one else is going to do that. So I had a lot of flexibility. She was born the end of March, so the weather was getting better. We could be out a lot. I traveled a lot with her that first year. So in some ways I kept thinking like, Jen, like get it together, because, you have all these things that so many other people would kill for. Yeah. I'm so blessed. She's healthy.
Yeah.
The baby's healthy, and so I think I kind of dismissed a lot of it and just kind of shoved it down, as I think a lot of women were societally kind of conditioned to do. Absolutely. As well. Mm-hmm. So it has really been a lot of kind of looking back over the last couple of years. Mm-hmm. And, as my oldest is going to turn 7 in 2 months, it always kind of, as a birthday approaches, you kind of start going back to that time. And, but it has been a journey and a lot of reflection and a lot of like kind of compassion for myself, mm-hmm. because we only know what we know at the time that we're, operating. And there's in this, conversation around postpartum, there's just so much lacking. And I think a lot of misinformation that can be really damaging too.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's try to clear some of that up. Maybe I'd love to hear from you. Like, how do we define postpartum?
Well, I think it depends on who you're talking to, right? Yeah. So like the medical establishment really kind of defines it from like the first 6 weeks to 6 months. The caveat being, if you're breastfeeding, some of these symptoms can stick around longer, when it comes to like the hormone fluctuations and stuff like that. I find that to be very problematic, because, you think that if you have a full term baby, you're talking that baby has incubated for, about 9 months. Right. And so then we're expecting things to just like go back to normal in a few weeks. And we're not taking into account the fact that way too many women have to go back to work when they're still like heavily bleeding, still stitched up. I mean, that's a whole other conversation. Yeah. We're not taking into fact the fact that oftentimes there are interventions, that need to happen, mm-hmm. For a variety of reasons. And I think the other piece we're really not looking at is the something that I've done a lot of studying around and talking about is like postpartum depletion. I'm kind of broadening this word to like maternal depletion or like feminine depletion, because I think so many, especially as women are getting pregnant later, than normal, like we're waiting longer because of finances, because of relationships, because of careers, things like that, or potentially fertility, challenges. That then it's like we're already entering a pregnancy stressed out. Yeah. We've got environmental toxins. We've got career stress. We've got potentially financial stress. If we did have to have fertility interventions, we've got that. Mm-hmm. So it's like we're already like in this hole, and then we give birth, and then they're just like, well, we're going to take the rope with us, and you just have to kind of climb out of this hole, mm-hmm. On your own with the baby. Good luck. So these are the pieces that I think are just not being talked about. The fact that there's already all of this kind of deficit. Yeah. And then we're throwing, a new life on top of it and saying, oh, but you should be feeling better 6 weeks to 6 months, Mm-hmm. And so I really like to say that I feel like, once postpartum, always postpartum. But now, I mean, there has been, some stuff I've read that says now it's kind of like 6 years. But I know the other piece we've talked a lot about is this sort of postpartum perimenopause conundrum.
Yeah.
Where, women are waiting longer to get pregnant. And then kind of potentially going, and it's going to be different for everybody, but sort of being still postpartum or, a year or two out from, childbirth. Where things are still kind of recalibrating. And then you're already sort of knocking on this perimenopause door. So that's a whole other fun can of worms.
Yeah, no. And I love that. I'm glad that you brought that up. Obviously that's super relevant to us here is that, the reality is that perimenopause begins around 35 for all women. And women are absolutely having children and able to have children and can have children and should if they want, well into their 40s. So,
absolutely.
But now we do have I think about perimenopause as like, it's a little bit like walking on a suspension bridge. Like things are just not solid. It's a transitionary period. So then you add to that the shifting of hormones. It's almost like you're now on the suspension bridge in a very big windstorm when you have a baby in the whole process.
Yeah, it's a good analogy.
Do we see the rising of postpartum symptoms much higher in women of this age, in perimenopause? Like, is it worse? Is it not? Do we know?
Well, there's actually a lot of symptoms that are common to both periods. So I think it can be one of those things where you're like, what am I? Are the symptoms I'm having because I still haven't totally recovered, which again, that word is challenging to me, but, transitioned maybe out of postpartum symptoms, or am I perimenopausal, or is there something else going on that maybe came out of that, there's a lot of times, autoimmune disease, is something that women don't have any issues with. They have babies and then all of a sudden that triggers some sort of autoimmune disease, which could also then play a role in hormones. So there's so many different things I think in play. But I mean, brain fog is something that is, we often kind of joke about like mom brain, but that's one that is common to both. Like breast tenderness, obviously periods that are kind of irregular, mental health, anxiety, night sweats. I had a lot of night sweats when I was postpartum, and that surprised the hell out of me. I remember waking up one morning, like in the middle of the night, and like soaked through. I mean, like could wring out my shirt. And I was like, what the hell is this? Like nobody told me this. Everyone said, oh, be worried about your first poop. But nobody told me about the like sweating through my nightgown, and like, and, weight fluctuations, so a lot of things, fatigue. I mean, it's like, tell me a mom who's not tired,
Right. Or insomnia, like not being able to sleep properly.
Too, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So then we normalize it, like, and we're told it's normal. Oh, it's just part of what you signed up for. Like, oh my God, like if there's one phrase I could totally permanently erase from, vocabulary, it would be that. But, I think that's what's so tricky about it is it's like, where am I falling on this spectrum of symptoms? When do I need to get intervention? And then, some other things that I discovered through my own research, apart from this idea that postpartum depletion is the thing, your gut changes during pregnancy, your microbiome becomes less diverse, which typically is not a good thing. It does it for good reason. But then again, it's like, well, it should just bounce back. Now, while your gut microbiome is actually pretty adaptable and responsive, it's like, show me a mom who is eating,
30 different plant foods in a day. Right. In reality, she's like, I will eat those goldfish crackers and that crust of your toast with jam.
Because I am starving, or I will eat the casserole that my neighbor brought to me because like, thank God she thought to bring me food. And even though none of this is like, this is good for me. Right.
Yeah.
So your brain changes, they've shown that like your brain gray matter can decrease like 5%. And so it's like, is the brain fog because of that? Is it because of the hormones? Is it because of the internal or external stressors? I mean, there's so many pieces at play, which is why this can be kind of a tricky conversation because it can be, which is why this is kind of a tricky, complicated conversation because, there is some crossover and we, and then there are, sadly not always the providers, depending on where people live and what their resources are, that are kind of up to date with some of this research, or able and willing to look at the holistic piece of the puzzle, instead of just saying, oh, well, you've got anxiety, let's just treat that. Or, oh, well, you've got irregular periods, let's just treat that. We're not looking at the holistic person, because that's not the way our medical system has been created. So, you know, it's one of those things where it's like, I never want people to feel like, well, we're all just screwed, you know, because I don't think we are. Conversations like this start to change it. But it is interesting, especially the perimenopause, postpartum conversation, because there is so much overlap. That it's, you know, so I want people to listening to know, like, if you're experiencing some of this, like, there is an element of like normality, but also that doesn't mean we have to sit back and take it. We can change it. It's normal because we've normalized it. So there's nothing wrong with you, but we also can, you know, equip ourselves with the information and resources to start to, you know, tip the balance in our favor.
Yeah. I love that. I think that's a really great, because you know, what I hear you saying is it is difficult to separate, like, where postpartum begins and where perimenopause ends, you know, where they start to, you know, and ultimately when we're talking about hormonal shifts of postpartum and hormonal, like, it's all just one big hormonal shift. Like, how it's being impacted might be different. You know, if you're within 6 years, you're saying, after having a baby. Is that what they were kind of starting to define that?
I mean, that's some of the more things I've kind of read, I think, by some of the more progressive voices, you know, in this world. But
which makes sense.
You're thinking, I mean, I had my second when I was 39. And so, I mean, it's, and again, it was like at the height of COVID, it was September 2020. So there was a lot of stress, you know, and so I'm like, well, I don't know. Did I struggle because of my age? Did I struggle because of the stress? Did I struggle because my second pregnancy was harder on me? And again, was that my age? Depletion? I mean, it's like, you know, the body tells us what's up, but it doesn't like tell us, you know, in our ear, like, well, this is why. Remember that, you know, remember that window of time? Like, this is what was going on. That would be nice, right?
More often than not, it's just like a straw that breaks the camel's back, right? Like, there's a bunch of different things. And that's why there's never a very necessarily clear answer. And that's why functional medicine is so helpful, because it's like treating that entire whole, which is what you're talking about.
Yeah.
It's amazing. So then if here we are and we understand, and I would say, like, I think when I think about it being 6 years, if that's what some of the research and more progressive voices are saying, like when we think at the whole picture, like you were talking about, you know, you have the interventions, and even if you didn't need to have fertility interventions, for some people, you know, we're on birth control, we get off birth control, it's still 6 months of like whatever, and, you know, then you get pregnant, then you're 9 months pregnant, then you're nursing for 1-2 years, maybe more, you know, like, in fitness, we recognize that, like, what you gain in 3 months, you can lose in 3 months, vice versa. So if it takes as long, I mean, that makes sense, 6 years for things to kind of set back into function. And that's assuming you only had one in there. If you have two in there, then you're in like, or three.
I was just going to say that. Yeah. Because I think because we're waiting, if you want to have more than one, you're doing it a lot closer to each other than maybe is recommended. I do remember taking a class when I was pregnant, and the midwife, or I can't remember whoever was teaching it, maybe the lactation consultant or something, but somebody said something to the effect of like, it takes your body, like, I'm paraphrasing, but 2 to 3 years to fully recover, you know, from almost like pregnancy and childbirth. So this wasn't even necessarily like postpartum. It was more like pregnancy and childbirth. So they're like, we really don't recommend that you have kids like less than 3 years apart.
Right.
Which, I mean, I wasn't ready for that. My girls are 3.5 years apart because I was just like mentally like, no, I'm good. But I know some people, because of career or finances or like age, you know, they want, or just desire, they want to have them closer together. And so again, it's like, you know, that it's
for Valentine's Day.
Yeah.
Sorry. Bad joke.
Fair point.
It happens. Like,
it does happen. It does happen. Or politics.
Or politics. Right. Yeah. That's so interesting. So, okay. So we understand, obviously, I think, you know, part of us talking is like, let's just normalize this conversation. Let's make sure people recognize there's something going on that isn't to be dismissed. And if for women listening right now who might be recognizing themselves in your story or in some of the symptoms that we're talking about, what would you say to them? Like, what are these first steps of getting support or getting information or getting help, since we really can't separate these two pieces?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I always like to say the first thing is like recognizing that, like, again, you are not broken. And like the way you're feeling is also not your fault. Because we, again, can only like operate and show up and make decisions based on like the information we have at our fingertips, in this time. And so I really like to say, like, kind of the first step is like that kind of like forgiveness of yourself. Because I think, again, like, we often talk about like mom guilt and stuff. And usually that's kind of used in a way of like, well, I feel bad because I'm not showing up for my kids. But I think there's this sort of like shame around like, God, why am I feeling so terrible? Like, like kind of how I said, get it together. So it is a little bit of this like forgiving yourself and understanding that you are worth feeling better. You are worth like, and the next step I often say is a cliche, but like, we got to put our oxygen mask on first. I do remember flying for the first time after I had my daughter and her being on that plane with me. And I traveled a lot and flown a lot up until that point, and they would always walk up and down the aisle and, do the whole safety thing. And I'd kind of, tune it out because you hear it once, you kind of know it. And then you travel with a child and it's a whole different experience. And they come and they actually tell, I assume most of them do, they're supposed to, but they talk to every person traveling with a child and they tell you, again, like stop you personally and say, in the event that, the oxygen mask drop, put yours on first before assisting your child. It's like they need to remind you of that because your instinct as a mother is to take care of everybody else first.
Right.
And so, but, we can't do that. We cannot take care of our kids and our partners and our coworkers and whatever else, our community, if we are a total disaster, like if we are sick and struggling. And so it has to be like permission to focus on yourself and create the infrastructure that allow you to do that, which I know can sometimes sound a lot easier said than done because not everybody has that system, that support system, access to healthcare, access to medical. One of the things I'm doing is launching a community to teach some of this, but also I believe so much in the power of moms coming together to offer support, to offer tools, to offer what's working and crowdsource information, to do that in a way that's a lot more like financially reasonable for people as well. So that's something that I'm working on, getting up and running. But, I think that kind of permission piece is really big for moms because it goes against, I think, our kind of maternal instincts to take care of everybody else and do that at the expense of our own well-being.
I love that you say that. And I think, it's always what we forget to sometimes think in this, about like, put your mask on first is like, and you will get sick and you will we are all human here. So everyone is failing a little bit. Everyone's wishing they could do better. Everyone is going to get sick and get run down and have rough times. Like it's not a perfect solution. So almost like recognizing that is a human quality to get run down, to not feel like you're doing your best sometimes.
Right.
So that, as you get better at prioritizing yourself, at putting that mask on first, we know that it's an imperfect process.
Yes, absolutely. I love that you said that because it is an imperfect process. And there's going to be different processes for everybody too. Some people, some people may, want to go and do the functional labs and all that stuff. And some people that might not be a first step that they're able to take financially. I mean, some of this stuff, because it is not mainstream, quote unquote, it can be an expensive road. So sometimes it's like, well, how can we work with your this is my acting background coming in, but how can we work with your given circumstances as a big part of like of character development in the scene study. When you're an actor, you look at like, well, okay, this is my job. I have this many kids. I live in this place. This is the temperature. Those are like given circumstances. So how can we work within your given circumstances to still change your circumstances and know that like there are little things you can do. And sometimes that's starting with a few little tweaks in what you're eating. Sometimes it's starting with nervous system regulation, which can be free to do. Sometimes it is starting with like, well, my job is toxic and my boss is horrific and I need to get out of this job. Okay, so how do we do that? So it's kind of triaging, right? Like what is the thing that is going to, tip that scale, favorably for you. And for me, it could be something completely different than what another mom needs or what you would need or something. And so that's, again, part of that kind of crowdsourcing to kind of see like, hey, this may work for you, but it may not be what this person needs. And that's okay. There is no perfect prescription for how to do motherhood, for how to do your health right, for, how to get by day. There's no one right way.
I love that you say that. I think you really nailed it there because, I mean, obviously I think, I don't want to assume that we all know, some of the healthy habits that we should have or, would be ideal. And some are more realistic or fitting to our lifestyle at the time. And sometimes that's where we need to start just to create a little more bandwidth, a little more peace, a little more hormonal balance, in order for us to even proceed to the next door, whether it's something we can do on our own or whether we need help or not. So I love that idea of sharing that, because if we can get a bunch of different options and people might be like, well, this I could manage today. This I could implement this week, no, but certainly, taking some breathing time or, whatever some of the tips are. But I love that. I think that's I will hopefully, when you launch that, I'd love to be able to put it in the show notes. So please make sure you send it.
Thank you. Yes. Yeah. The wait list is open. So that I can definitely give you for the show notes. And then depending when this airs, maybe the sales page will be live. We'll see.
Wonderful. Wonderful. I love that, Jen. Is there anything else you would like? Because I think obviously this is a big topic. As I said, I'm so grateful that you vulnerably shared so clearly about your part of it. And I think in such a warm way, right? In such an accepting way, you do that so well. So I can see where our community is going to thrive under your care. So thank you for that. But is there anything else you recommend to, the woman out there who is listening, who is within 6, who's experienced postpartum, and maybe it is a forever thing, who might be struggling?
Yeah, I think trusting your own intuition, which is really big. There are some blessings to the internet and social media that gives us a lot of access to like people like you and podcasts and people who I feel very aligned with. And then there's a lot of harmful, polarizing information out there. And there's a lot of information out there designed to make you feel like something is wrong with you, that that you're doing it wrong, and designed to scare and polarize people, and especially in health. And that's really made me sad, since I've been in this kind of world for like 15 years, to kind of see how at the end of the day, we all have the common objective, most of us, I don't say all, but to just help people feel better. And yet there's so many people saying it's got to be this way or it's got to be this way. And that's just it's never going to be that way. It's never going to be that way. But I have so many conversations with moms who are just like, I feel like I just don't, like, I feel like I really should be doing this, but like, or I feel like I want to be doing this, but I should be doing this. And we have that, I call it the mother hen, like kind of voice in our head that's constantly like, well, you should be doing this. You should be doing this. When really like if we get quiet, our instinct, our gut, like our motherboard is like, no, like this is what I need to be doing. And we, I think, are really taught to just trust that true sense of self. When we have kids, because all of a sudden our priorities go and to such different levels. So giving yourself permission to just like be quiet with yourself and like kind of try to sort out like the shoulds or the like, this influencer is telling me this, so this must be the way. And really focusing on like what is that, like I like to say, woman within the mother, like what does she really need, I like that. And then what's a step that I can take? Maybe it's just a conversation with your partner or a conversation with a therapist or a conversation with a friend, maybe it's unfollowing that influencer that makes you feel like shit, but like, what is one little step that you can take based on like truly that like knowing voice inside yourself? That's really been the journey for me this last year, is really like
trusting,
listening and trusting, and it can be easier said than done,
so yeah, absolutely. Because I think we are often taught to look outside of ourselves for answers. And yet it is always in that stillness. Like, I mean, there's no right or wrong about a feeling that you're having. It's a feeling that you're having. So if you're having it, then we do need to ask questions about it. And I think that that's, part of what you're saying is like, let's pay attention, because there's just, there's answers, there's solutions, there's progress to be made.
Absolutely.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Jen. I really appreciate you being here. How can we find out more from you? So for anyone listening who wants to connect more deeply, wants to follow your work, I will put this in the show notes, but I'd love to hear it from you.
Yeah. So I have a little podcast that called Renegade Motherhood, where it's really short, gritty episodes, just me so far, of kind of just talking about some stuff I wish I had known before I had kids. So that's called Renegade Motherhood. It's on all the platforms. Website is Renegade Motherhood Life. That's where there's a waitlist open for the community and where that'll all live. And the podcast is there too. And there's some freebies on that site as well, some different guides I put together and stuff. And then I mostly right now hang out on Instagram, and that's Meet Jen Morris. So I'm there. Sometimes I'm on TikTok, just kind of
all around.
Yeah.
Choose your poison. Go where you'd like to go. Yeah. Amazing. I'm so excited. Well, I love your podcast. So for anyone listening, make sure to go check that out. And links will be in the show notes. But thank you again so much, Jen. I really appreciate what you do and how you serve.
Thank you. Back at you.
Thank you. All right, sisters, go out, be more in your life and not just less on a scale. And we'll catch you next time.
Thank you so much for joining me on the Period Whisperer podcast. If you liked this episode, take 30 seconds right now to write a review on iTunes, and then reach out to me directly on Instagram at Bria_period_whisperer and message me there with a screenshot of your review. As a thank you, I will give you a customized free hormone audit to get you on your way to the best health of your life in midlife.